Hello, I'm Nelson Liu, and thanks for joining us for Western Perspective. Australia's souring relationship with China has reached its trading partnership, with one organisation claiming it won't be pushed around if its sector is hit first. The Pastoralists and Graziers Association has warned Australia needs to become more competitive in the face of declining trade relations with China, or it faces an economic cost. I talked to the association's president Tony Seabrook about Australia's relationship with China and how it's affected the nation, beginning with the agriculture sector. Tony Seabrook, thanks for joining us. What's your take on the relationship with China in relation to the agriculture sector?
We're seen as a soft underbelly. I think the Chinese believe that they can bring political influence to bear against our government by hitting agriculture. I think they see us as being fairly well connected politically and able to persuade government to change policy.
So you talk about being able to hit Australia politically. How bad would that be if they were able to?
They've taken offence at something our Prime Minister had to say about an inquiry into the COVID virus and where it started from. Most Australians would say that what the Prime Minister did was not unreasonable. It was very muted and a very fair thing to do. They are basically saying to Australia now, if you say anything that contravenes what we see as good policy or the way we'd like to run our country, we will punish you. And all the excuses given about dumping, insects, a whole range of things, most of us perceive this to be something entirely different. We perceive this to be a spurious way of actually attacking Australia through a soft underbelly, which is through agriculture.
So when you look at this relationship with China at the moment, it's a bad relationship that could potentially be much, much worse.
There are two players here. The Chinese seem to be quite happy to make it a lot worse. Our government is very muted, it's very polite, it's very diplomatic in everything that it's said. There is a real avenue here to open up a dialogue that could put this behind us if there was a desire from both sides to put this behind us. The big issue now is that China needs what we have. It needs our iron ore, it needs the food we produce. It's not a nation that has these resources, it needs them. It's unfathomable to most of us to try and work out what on earth they're trying to do, because it was a good, mutually respectful relationship before, and it's soured. And it just seems to be purely China saying to Australia, toe the line or else we will punish you.
With regards to the agriculture sector and the people involved in it in our regions, they're going to be affected, aren't they? So what are the worst effects to those people?
Yeah, we'll take the first hit, there's no doubt about that, but farmers spend their money and they spend it in the city. And when you deprive a farmer of income, you deprive him of his spending capacity. And the money that we would normally spend in the cities on a whole range of different things will not be spent. So the punishment, although initially landing on the shoulders of farmers, flows into the broader community right across Australia. And I'd like most Australians to recognise that this is not just a punishment to wine growers or beef producers or barley growers. This is an economic punishment that will be borne by the broader community.
Are you saying that the farmers won't back down and take up the fight?
It's not quite as simple as that. It's not a matter of won't back down. I think that what's happening with China is it's asserting its position in the world, and most Australians are well enough educated, which is different to the people living in China. We do know what's going on in the world. We do know what bullying looks like. And the general feeling, I think, is that although this will come at an economic cost, perhaps it's a cost better borne, because it has happened in history before, where bullies have been allowed to bully their way to the top. And it doesn't stand Australia in good stead to roll over here, kowtow to a policy from another foreign nation that's not in our national interest. So I think most rural people have a very deep understanding of what's at play here. We don't want to suffer the economic cost of what might happen, but we have a very clear view that if you don't stand on certain principles, you will get pushed back and back and back till in the end you don't have any principles left.
If we're talking about spending power, as you say the farmers have, does it mean that their jobs will be affected as well?
Oh, there's no doubt. There's absolutely no doubt. But what I would say to all Australians today, we need to construct an environment in which our industries are more competitive. We did produce every single thing we needed in this country 30 or 40 years ago, and we've gradually, bit by bit, allowed these industries to fall by the wayside. And this has been very stupid, short-sighted policy, economic policy by governments. We have stamp duty, we have payroll tax, we have a whole range of compliance issues here that make it far too expensive for people to manufacture. What we need to do as Australians is buy Australian-made, but Australian-made needs to be competitive. Government has a huge part to play in making what we produce here competitive.
So self-sustainability will have to be the key here. What's the take on China's relations? Do you believe that the current economic hit is worth it when it comes to standing up for what is right?
Well, you actually have to ask the other question, how far down the track are you going to go in trying to appease a nation that may never be appeased, no matter what we do? Once they realise that they can actually bring pressure to bear on nations all over the world, and they are doing it to other countries other than Australia, once they realise they can force their will economically on other independent nations, there'll be no end to it. we as a nation need to join others in just standing up and calling it out for what it actually is and saying, no, we won't do that. Now, there's a cost. And there was a cost back in 1930 when there was turmoil developing in Europe. We didn't stand up when we should have. And I had 3 uncles and a father who copped the brunt of that in fighting that war because we didn't stand up early enough when we could have. Now, I'm not saying it's got to that, but we just need to be very careful we don't compromise ourselves to the point where there's nothing left to compromise.
This week, Premier Mark McGowan has called for the federal government to fix its relationship with China. Is this really what should be happening?
That's a bit cute, because it's very easy to ask someone else to do what you won't or can't do yourself. We certainly need to sort it out if we can. I think the government is being very careful in what it's currently doing with the Chinese, very diplomatic and very careful, but it's just not fair for the Premier to stand up and say that. What I would say to the Premier is you can do things to make this state of ours independent. You can do things to create real positive jobs, not coffee shop jobs, not entertainment jobs, not tourist jobs, but real manufacturing jobs. You can do this. But it's about payroll tax, it's about stamp duty, it's about compliance. There's a huge amount that he can do, that he ought to do, and it's not fair to sit back and fire a shot at the federal government just saying they should fix it, when he will in no way cop any of the responsibility for the actual problem that we're dealing with.
Finally, ultimately, what do you want to see happen?
The right outcome would be for the Chinese to realise that this is going nowhere, it's going to hurt all of us in the end, and to just say, look, let's just sit down around the table and talk our way through this. The fact they're not even prepared to talk to our people is a real indication of how serious they are about doing us economic harm. It's a mutual arrangement that could work very well for both parties, and that's where I'd like to see it go back to. But one of the things about totalitarian states, when they assume a position, they're not prone to backflip. And what you'd actually be asking for here is a reversal of policy that would look awfully much like that. And so I have a grave fear that if we allow this to continue to escalate, it's got more chance of getting worse rather than better. And I've been to China many, many times. I like the country, I like the people, I am in awe of what they've been able to do with their economy. But for heaven's sake, let's get this back to a relationship that's mutually beneficial to all of us, rather than trying to give us a belting.
Tony Seabrook, thank you very much.
Dennis, thank you too.
And now, the AMA WA's President Dr Andrew Miller provides his weekly COVID-19 update and why he won't run in next year's state election.
Hi, thanks for your time. Happy Father's Day to all the dads out there and the dads-to-be. My dad has passed now, but I've got a picture of him up here on the wall from 50 years ago when he was in Vietnam. He was a doctor there during the war with the Australian Army, and I miss him very much, but I'm very grateful. And that's what today's about for me. It's about gratitude for the life that he built for us here in Western Australia, where I'm very grateful to be, obviously, during this pandemic. And as I had the privilege of being able to sit around with my 3 kids this afternoon, not doing much other than, Dad just soaking up as much of their time as I can. Really grateful that we're not going through what large parts of the world are. So around 27 million cases around the world now, around about 883,000 deaths. Unfortunately, we have no idea what this disease means for the survivors yet. We don't know how many of them end up with chronic disability, and that's another reason that we don't just look at the death rates. We look at, well, what's the problem this is going to cause for the community long run. Australia's been lucky with only 26,000 cases to date and about a bit under 800 deaths. And people bring up the example of Sweden quite a bit at the moment because they're sort of saying, well, is that another way of doing it? Well, not unless you want 84,000 cases and approaching 6,000 deaths now. So we're nearly 800, they're nearly 6,000. That's a very difficult thing for a society to swallow, that many people have had to die so that you can remain a bit more free with your economy. Has it helped their economy? Well, no, it hasn't. They've had a bigger contraction of their economy than we have, and Deloitte have put out some information this week around how economies are travelling compared to their cumulative death rates. And I won't bore you with the whole graph, but I will tell you that Australia, South Korea, Taiwan doing very well economically by comparison to places like the UK and Spain, who have huge death rates per million in their population and terrible devastation of their economic growth as well. So the economic problem follows the deaths and the disease. And it makes sense when you think about it. If you have that horrible thing going through your community, it's going to smash the confidence apart from removing a lot of people from the workforce who are either sick or isolated. Then you have USA and Sweden who've had about double our economic contraction and a much, much bigger death rate as well. So I would encourage people to stay the course. I think the Australian leaders have done the right thing. It will continue to be questioned. People will continue to push the buttons and say, well, what about pursuing herd immunity? Well, Sweden's nowhere near herd immunity. You've got to get about 80% or so of your population with this disease immune. And even if people are immune after they've had the infection, which they probably are for a period of time, Sweden might be up around 10 to 20% of the population now. So they've got a long way to go. If that's the strategy, and it is an ill-conceived idea. Our politicians here have set out in the right direction. I was asked this week if I'd consider a career in politics, and I have enormous respect for the workload that politicians take on, for the criticism that they cop in the process of the work, for their idea that their job's always hanging by a thread. They never know what's going to happen with the next election or the next phone call from the leader. It's a tough game. Too tough for the likes of me. I'm happy to get in there and speak to politicians, explain to the community why it is that we think that we should follow a particular path as far as medicine, as far as the health of the community is concerned. And I think this has been a really good example of how health can't be separated from anything else. No one can enjoy a big bank account if they're not healthy. So we'll continue to push the line of looking after people first, being empathetic, looking after those who are suffering disproportionately as a result of the restrictions we have in place through separations from loved one or through damage to their business. It's only right that in Australia we don't leave anybody behind and we look after those who are doing it tougher than the rest of us. But all the nonsense you see in places like the US, all the people objecting to masks or saying it's not a real disease or that it's caused by 5G or that the vaccine's just being brought in to harm people, those are dangerous ideas because unfortunately there are big vulnerable bits of our population that start to latch onto these things because they always take an alternative worldview. They don't really fit into the kind of society that the rest of us do. And so even though some of them seem to be quite reasonable people with sort of reasoned arguments, in fact, they end up in a very dangerous place. We have to stay unified behind our Premier here in WA, proud that he went to National Cabinet and told them that we're different to the rest of the country because we are. We've got a huge desert between us and the rest of the country. That's very different to having an enmeshed border like Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland, New South Wales. We're very different to everywhere else. We need to stick to our plan. And I have every confidence that we'll get there. So all the dads out there, I hope you're being well looked after today like I am, and that you're taking some time out for yourselves and for your family. Our hearts as doctors go out to you. We see what people in our community have to go through. We're worried about everyone, but we're proud of everyone, and we're grateful to be here in WA at the moment with the good fortune that we're having with this disease. So be optimistic about the vaccine. I think it'll be a good one. I think it'll be here next year. And in the meantime, let's look after one another. Thanks for your time today.
And that's all for this week. We'll be back with another episode of WP next time. But until then, it's back to you, Ivan and Sarah.
Thank you, Nelson. And that's our weekly news and current affairs. We have the latest news on the website and social media pages.
We'll see you next weekend and have a nice evening.
Wish you good health and take care.